definitely like the fact that the start menu tune was what our heroes played in order to get in here. It gives it just a little bit more weight, but then I suppose I already knew that song had a good amount of weight behind it. The theme song shows up in every mainline Final Fantasy game. I'm not quite as sure about the spin-offs, but I think it might show up there as well. Okay, so Rios is a palette swap of Shimra's. I just checked where that name came from, and the only result I got was a lot of references to this very game. Not that it really matters where the names of the enemies we're fighting came from. All that matters is that we can take them down. And they're certainly going down reasonably fast considering the power of our hits out here. Level 42 is definitely feeling pretty comfortable around here. At the very least, I don't feel like we're under-leveled, so we must be doing something right. Even in the final dungeon of the game, we're running into wolf palette swaps. Dear God, this is just... ugh. I know I shouldn't judge an enemy by their appearance, but we've been seeing wolves since the absolute first clip of the game. They aren't exactly something I think of as something we should be running into when we had to go through the fabric of time to reach this final dungeon. I know it's not a bare-bones basic wolf or a warg or a werewolf, but I just do not feel that wolf sprites belong this far into the game, period. Somehow, I don't care as much about seeing Flans here when we've dealt with those since all the way back in the Marsh Cave. Probably because the slimes and Flans, or at least things with a similar design but different color, were pretty troublesome when we first ran into them. And my first instinct whenever seeing them is, oh god, I should start using magic. For some reason, only the green ones are actually explicitly resistant to a high degree to physical attacks. The very first ones we ran into back when we were working on getting to the vampire, and after that the lich in the same dungeon. None of the others really made an impression on me. They just coasted along with the reputation of the first variety that we ran into. And since the green ones were able to poison you by random chance from a regular attack, that makes a mostly physical team even less appealing at that stage of the game. Every fight would be a roulette. Is our team going to get a critical hit? Are we going to be poisoned? Just how many turns is this going to take? But once you get past the Marsh Cave, it feels like things get easier for a fighter, rogue, monk, and white mage team. But it was a hurdle, no doubt about that. I just wish there were other enemies in other dungeons that made me go, oh shit, and adjust like those things did. Just because my first response is physical attacks and brute force doesn't mean I want that to be the only solution against our enemies. We have the tools in case we need something else, so why doesn't the game really feel like it pushes the player to adjust our tactics all that often? Probably should have used a high potion on Tyson. Apparently my mental math didn't figure out that was around 150 heal to recover until we already used 2 potions. That's what I get for trying to do the math in my head, but then it'd be a bit ridiculous to pull out a calculator for something that minor. Well, that ended in just 1 turn, but that was a pretty painful turn, all things considered. Bloody hell, I really wish that I had some idea who would strike when, because that only felt rough because of pure luck. Sure, we can overcome things even when luck isn't on our side, but this is going to be a long trip to the final boss. And we've burnt through how many of our supplies so far without facing anything all that noteworthy? Good God, I'm getting the distinct feeling that I'm going to end up pulling out of the dungeon for resupplying. I am just not a fan of the attrition we're dealing with just based off the grunts. I can't really complain about the hard hits we're taking every time the enemy has a chance to strike. Again, this is the final dungeon of the story. Once we're done, the credits will roll. When the original game was released, post-game content was not invented yet. And while I might have been more willing to go through the stuff that the PSP version added to the game if it was post-game content, that is not how they set things up. They just made dungeons that are in many ways more frustrating to deal with and annoying as hell to navigate through. As far as I remember, there is no story beat that comes after beating the bonus PSP-only dungeons. It is just a way to grind your levels up, so that when you get to the final dungeon, it's no longer a challenge. Granted, I wish the challenge was something other than making me mentally debate if I should go on or pull back to get some potions and high potions, or having to open maps that they're online instead of just relying on my own sense of direction in the game. I'm pretty sure that the way the volcano handled things with the lava ground felt like a more meaningful trying barrier than what we've been seeing here. It felt distinct, but so far the only distinct thing about this dungeon was how we entered it in the first place. But I suppose we're still pretty early inside of the thing. Hell, we just entered a basement floor when I thought our goal was to go higher up. And based on the amount of raw footage I've got left, they have plenty of time to make this dungeon something pretty standout instead of relying on high-level encounters to wear us down. Not that the Earth Medusas feel all that high-level considering how strong we are at this point. Seriously, who invited these ladies into the final dungeon of the game? Is it the same person who let the Frost Wolves in? Sure, we're not seeing any goblins or ogres, but still, what is going on here? What made them decide to have enemies show up in this dungeon when they're so weak? More Earth Medusas. Can those poor girls do anything against us this far into the game? Yeah. All they're doing is slowing us down, not really doing any damage worth giving a damn about. I'm pretty sure the only one vulnerable to that gaze is Boromir here. As much as I like hearing the victory jingle, it just doesn't have the impact it probably should. At least not after we've heard it so damn often. Or when the fight we just went through was so one-sided in our favor, I wouldn't really call it a fight worth celebrating. Why are we facing easier enemies in the basement than we did on the previous floor? Yeah, casting haste really doesn't seem to be worth much if it's not gonna let you send a strike first. Granted, I'm vaguely remembering when the Lich cast slow on us earlier in the game and kinda screwed up with our physical attacks. Appropriate, since I'm pretty sure we fought these same clay golems back then as well, but these clay golems are getting taken down in 1 or 2 shots and don't really have the time to take advantage of any self-buffs. Hell, there really aren't that many reasons to bother using some of the spells meant to buff you up or debilitate your opponent, when the game just encourages you to brute force your way through so much of what comes your way. This is, a reasonably versatile team, but there's not much point in pulling out the proverbial screwdriver or saw, when 90% of the time we just need to apply the hammer. Really? 4 health. You got the first strike off, and you only managed to take off 4 of our health on a guy with a maximum of 752. We went from enemies that were striking all 4 of our team at once for around 50 damage each, to enemies that struggle to manage to do double-digit damage to a single target. Are we sure we're still in the same dungeon? Wait, what? The Lich? The first of the 4 elemental bosses in the game, a major barrier for us trying to make progress early on, is just gonna show up without any build-up in here. I mean, sure, we time traveled to get here, but if we're killing the Lich now, does that mean we didn't actually fight the Lich back in the Earth Shrine? I mean, the guy is a skeleton. Does death really work the same way for him that it does for everyone else? But the really confusing part is that he's somehow significantly stronger than he was when we fought him. In gameplay terms, I know why that's the case. He's supposed to be a challenge for us this far in. But I still would have liked some more warning before running into a souped-up version of a boss we already beat. And why does he get enhanced while the grunts that worked for him back in the Marsh Cave stayed the same? He is so many steps above the Earth Medusas and Clay Golems that the altitude shift makes your ears pop. He's got black holes now! And that black hole somehow did nothing to us despite rather dramatic animation for it. Seriously, what is going on out here? Well, at least I'm using Fira instead of just basic fire. He's certainly pushing us further than we've been pushed by most enemies to get this far. I'm still, not using the highest level fire spell for some reason, though. Maybe I'm just saving myself for whatever comes after this guy. Doesn't matter how menacing the animation is if it can't land. And that takes care of Lich for the final time. We've got to fight against the other 3 elemental guardians on our way to the final boss. It's certainly something unique about the final dungeon, but they really should have done more to make it feel like something we should prep for, instead of just tripping over a major boss fight as we're about to go on a staircase. And good God, this really makes me wish that we could use those various tents, cottages, and sleeping bags on the way through a dungeon. There is very little reason in this game to use them outside, especially when we're this high level, and the encounters in the overworld are pretty weak in comparison to us. But when we actually need that kind of convenient healing, no, not allowed to do it, so long as there's a roof over your head for some reason. Or at least that's how it feels in the Pixel remaster version. I'm not entirely sure I remember how it was in the PSP version. a few rules just seem to change arbitrarily between the PSP and the Pixel Remaster. Anyway, we've got fire monsters, which means that the volcano lady I can't remember the name of is going to show up next. I suppose when you know that what you're in for, when you're fighting the old bosses again and the themed enemies are kind of a good hint of what you're going to be fighting next, but the first one still felt like quite the surprise to me. And while the bosses get upgrades, the monsters that served them don't. So they don't prove as a good way to get prepped for the boss fight like they did in the dungeons they originally showed up in. Excuse me for finding that either the common enemies that are linked to said bosses should get an upgrade, or taking them down means something, or thing that's up far end, just anything. Or maybe just have us fight against the enemies we were running into when we first went back to the past in the first place. I'm not exactly picky, I just would prefer that regular enemies feel like decent threats before we get to the major threat. Anyway, it definitely feels like it'd be easy for me to get lost around here without using a map. There's not really much to make one part of the floor feel distinctive compared to the others. It all just blurs together. Sure, there's not all that much the game can do to make things look nice given the camera angle, but they can at least make the layout a little easier to orient yourself in. This floor in particular feels like it'd be so easy for me to lose track of where I am and end up making mistakes trying to get to wherever I'm actually trying to go. Pretty sure the Gigas was the most threatening of that group, assuming you can call enemies from this far back in the game threatening to us now. I'm pretty sure we were around level 15 or 20 when we first started running into these fire lizards. At the very least, it's nice to see that these are more threatening than the enemies from the Marsh Cave. But we already knew that the monsters in the volcano were more dangerous from the Marsh Cave ones. This is not a revelation by any means. And here's our second boss fight in this dungeon. Again, no build-up, we just walk next to a staircase and we fight against a heavy-hitting, very durable boss after getting used to dealing with regular enemies that are far below our level. It is absolutely jarring, and there is nothing other than maybe the staircase itself to warn you that the boss fight is near. Hell, maybe show their colored crystal ball and have them speak to us again. Something to make us feel more hyped up just before business picks up. Wait, why am I going with Thundera instead of Blizzara against the fire-themed foe? Okay, so Thundera doesn't seem to do all that much less than Blizzara, so it's not like Ice is super effective or something. Apparently, I've stopped bothering to throw magic attacks since she's annoyingly durable when it comes to magic. I probably should have used a stronger healing spell on Tyson. But to be fair, it's not like we had any idea that our Snake Lady here would get to attack before Morn got to send a healing spell, or that she'd specifically target Tyson in that turn. We just don't have a lot of information to work with when it comes to more tactical decisions. Probably one of the reasons why I generally don't do a lot of tactical stuff, like setting up buffs for our team or debuffs for the enemy. Those moves are probably very, very important to use against bosses in particular, but we can get away with not using them. And a lot of the benefits are not really spelled out in a way that they feel all that critical to me when we are just constantly causing damage and constantly healing. Okay, why am I going back to the bare bones basic Black Mage spells? I'm definitely not using our Black Mage anywhere near as much as we probably should. I like having the option to use other tools, but I'm clearly not using them. And that does it, she's done. I feel confident enough that we can keep pushing forward from here. Not sure if I'll feel confident in getting to Tiamat in a single push, though. Guess we'll see next time.